All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the Indiana Department of Education's webinar series covering the new Student-Centered Accountability System. My name is Maggie Payno, and I am the Director of Accountability for the department. During this webinar, I'll be providing an overview of the new Student-Centered Accountability System, which will be used to calculate grades for the 2015-16 school year. If you have questions during the presentation, please submit them to schoolaccountability@doe.in.gov. That email address is currently on the screen if you would like to write it down from there. We will answer questions after each section as well as at the end of the presentation as time permits. To make it easier for us, if you would please indicate the domain or component for which your question is based in the subject line of your email to us. That way we can respond accordingly to your email. We'll begin with an overview of the entire system and some important information on the general calculation. The new Student-Centered Accountability System values student performance, but also values individual growth and rewards schools for ensuring that students are on track to being proficient, remaining proficient, or moving up to higher levels of proficiency. Under the new system, schools are encouraged to continue working with students to catch up, to monitor proficient students to ensure they keep up or move up, to help high-achieving students remain high-performing, and to push students to stick to it and graduate, even if it takes 5 years. The new Student-Centered Accountability System is based on 3 domains. The first domain in the system is student performance. The new system looks at student performance because it is important to examine how many students in a school are able to demonstrate proficiency on Indiana College and Career Ready standards in English Language Arts and Math. The performance component takes into account whether students are proficient on state assessments. The performance domain is made up of scores for an English Language Arts indicator and a math indicator. The second domain in the system is student growth. The new system looks at individual student growth because it is important to recognize and reward students, schools, and teachers that are making progress. The new Student-Centered Accountability System assigns points for growth that students are making based on whether a student is catching up, keeping up, or moving up. The growth component recognizes the value and importance of helping students move in the right direction, even if students are not currently proficient. It also recognizes the importance of keeping students who are high-performing at high-performing levels. The growth domain is made up of scores for an English Language Arts indicator and a math indicator. The third domain in the system is multiple measures. It is important for students to have taken steps to demonstrate preparedness in college and/or career readiness, which is why the multiple measures domain is included in the new system. The multiple measures domain is made up of scores for a graduation rate indicator and a college and career readiness achievement indicator. When calculating each domain, the department uses data reported to us by vendors and by schools through collections submitted through the STN Application Center. For 2015-16 accountability grades, the performance domain will be based on the 2015-16 ISTEP and ISTAR results, the 2016 attendance data submitted by schools on the DOE AT report, and the 2016 Limited English Proficiency report submitted by schools on the DOE LE report. The growth domain will be based on the 2014-15 and 2015-16 ISTEP results, the 2016 attendance data submitted by schools on the DOE AT report, and the 2016 Limited English Proficiency report submitted by schools on the DOE LE report. Please note that growth does not include students who take the ISTAR. The multiple measures domain will be based on the 2014 and 2015 cohort reports, which compile attendance, real-time, and graduation data submitted by schools on the DOE AT, DOE RT, and DOE GR reports. The multiple measures domain also uses dual credit data submitted by schools on the DOE CC and DOE DC reports, vendor data from College Board and International Baccalaureate, and a report from the Department of Workforce Development regarding industry certifications. All right, now let's transition into a discussion about each of the domains that make up the overall grade. First up is performance. Performance combines a passing rate score and a participation rate score for grades 3 through 8 and 10. A school will receive a score for English Language Arts and Math to make up the overall performance domain score. The passing rate identifies the percentage of students who demonstrated proficiency in English Language Arts and Math. The participation rate looks at how many students participated in the assessment. Federal requirements indicate that at least 95% of students must be tested. If a school does test at least 95% of its students, then the system considers this as achieving 100% participation. Therefore, the participation rate defaults to 100%. However, if a school does not meet this 95% requirement, then the participation rate does not get adjusted. Students must meet certain requirements to be included in the passing rate and the participation rate. A student will only be included in the passing rate if the student was enrolled for at least 162 days at the school during the school year. This is to ensure that a school is only held accountable for students enrolled at the school for at least 90% of the school year. Students must also be in a tested grade with a valid test score. Currently tested grades are 3 through 8 and 10. This is to ensure that a student may be validly assessed for proficiency. Lastly, limited English proficient students enrolled for less than 12 months in the U.S. are excluded from the English Language Arts passing rate. This is a federal flexibility for states and schools. Please note that these students are not excluded from the math passing rate. Participation rate looks at a different subset of students. Specifically, participation rate looks at all students enrolled during the testing windows, not just those students enrolled at least 162 days. Therefore, it is possible to have students included in a school's participation rate that are excluded from a school's passing rate. Additionally, students must be in a tested grade to be counted in the participation rate. When we calculate the performance domain, we take the passing rate for each subject area and multiply it by the participation rate for each subject area. Again, the passing rate takes into account the number of students passing the assessment out of the number of students taking the assessment. The participation rate takes into account the number of students taking the assessment out of the number of students required to participate in the assessment. As previously stated, if a school has at least a 95% participation rate, then the participation rate defaults to 100%. Let's walk through an example. Elementary school ABC educates grades 3 through 5. There were a total of 100 students that were enrolled in grades 3 through 5 for 162 days and were assessed in English Language Arts and Math. Of the 100 students, 90 passed the English Language Arts assessment and 85 passed the math assessment. This gives elementary school ABC a passing rate for English Language Arts of 90% and a passing rate for math of 85%. Next, we determine the participation rates for elementary school ABC. There were a total of 110 students enrolled in grades 3 through 5 during the testing window for English Language Arts and Math. Note that there are 10 more students included in the participation rate because we are looking at whether the student was enrolled during the testing windows, not whether the student was enrolled for 162 days. Of the 110 students, 100 were assessed in English Language Arts and 105 were assessed in Math. This gives elementary school ABC a participation rate for English Language Arts of 90.9% and a participation rate for Math of 95.5%. Because the Math participation rate met the 95% threshold, we consider it to be 100%. To get the final performance score, we determine the points for the English Language Arts and Math respectively. This is determined by multiplying the pass rate by the participation rate for each subject area. For English Language Arts, we end up with 81.8% or 81.8 points after multiplying the passing rate of 90% by the participation rate of 90.9%. For Math, we end up with 85% or 85 points after multiplying the passing rate of 85% by the participation rate of 100%. The final scores for English Language Arts and Math are then weighted equally to yield the overall performance domain score of 83.4 points for elementary school ABC. All right, let's move on to the growth domain. Growth looks at whether each individual student is on track to catch up, keep up in proficiency level on the English Language Arts and Math assessments. Each student is assigned a point value based on individual student growth from last year to this year. By awarding points to individual students, the growth model recognizes the value of growth in the right direction for all students at all levels of proficiency. For example, schools are rewarded for helping students who were not proficient in the prior year to catch up and move toward proficiency. Schools are also rewarded for helping students who were proficient in the prior year to keep up and stay at the same proficiency level or move up to a higher proficiency level. Lastly, schools are rewarded for helping students who were highly proficient in the prior year to stay at a highly proficient level. As with the performance domain, growth looks only at those students who meet all criteria to be included in the calculation. A student will only be included in a school's growth score if the student was enrolled for at least 162 days at the school during the school year. This is to ensure that a school is only held accountable for students enrolled at that school for at least 90% of the school year. Students must also be in grades 4 through 8 and 10 because these are the tested grades that allow for the growth analysis from prior to current year that is needed to get a growth score for a student. Students must have a valid test score for current and prior tested years. This is because growth is assessed based on at least 2 years of test score data. In order to validly assess growth from one tested year to the next, test scores for each year must be valid. Lastly, students must be in the next consecutive tested grade from the last tested year. For example, a student who is in the 5th grade this year and took the 5th grade I-STEP must have been in the 4th grade last year and tested on the 4th grade I-STEP in English Language Arts and Math to be included in the growth score. This is because growth scores are based on calculations across consecutive tested grade levels. Additionally, please note that students taking iStar are not included in the growth domain calculations. It is important to remember that the growth domain will not be included in the final score for grades 9 through 12, since we cannot yet calculate 10th grade growth. This means that in addition to 10th grade growth, there will be no 10 to 12 improvement score for grades 9 through 12 in 2015-16 accountability. We will still discuss this calculation, however, to ensure that everyone is informed on the system as a whole. Again, we will not have any growth on the high school side, the 9 through 12 side, for 15-16 accountability released this fall-winter timeline. The first year that we will be able to calculate growth on the high school side will be 16-17 accountability. A quick note on the growth calculation. We will cover this in more detail in our growth model webinar training session. Therefore, our discussion in this presentation will be very general. We encourage you to register for our growth model webinar if you would like to get an in-depth presentation on the growth model. Again, we may limit which kind of questions we take on the growth domain strictly because we want to save those for the growth model presentation where we go into more depth on the growth model itself. When calculating the growth domain, we start at a micro level and work our way down to a macro level. First, we determine the amount of points awarded to each individual student based on a growth to proficiency table. Then we calculate a score for the top 75% and bottom 25% of students for each subject area based on the total observed growth points earned by students in each subgroup. Those subgroup scores are then weighted equally to yield the subject area scores for English Language Arts and Math, respectively. Lastly, the subject area scores are weighted equally to yield the final growth domain score. If a school has a graduation cohort, then an improvement score for grade 12 is also included in the overall growth domain score. The grade 12 improvement score gives schools credit for moving students from being non-proficient in math and/or English Language Arts on the graduation exam in 10th grade to being proficient by the end of 12th grade. Grade 12 improvement is included in the new accountability system because it encourages schools to work with students who did not initially pass the graduation exam so that they may pass by the time they graduate. The 10 to 12 improvement score is calculated by finding the difference in the percent of students that pass the graduation exam by the end of 12th grade and the percent of students that pass the graduation exam in 10th grade. This value is then multiplied by 10 to get a point score. Please note that when we do the 10 to 12 improvement, we are looking at the same cohort throughout. So we look at the cohort when it was 10th grade and when it was 12th grade. Here's an example of how the 10 to 12 improvement calculation works. 91% of students in the graduation cohort at High School XYZ passed the math graduation exam. Of that 91%, 76% passed the math graduation exam when they were in 10th grade. This gives us a 12th grade pass rate of 91% and a 10th grade pass rate for the same cohort of students of 76%. When we subtract 76 from 91, we see an improvement of 15%. This 15% is then multiplied by 10 to give High School XYZ 1.5 points for the grade 12 improvement component. These points are then added to the overall math growth score for the school to yield the final growth score. The same calculation process is completed for English Language Arts. Let's look at the last domain of the new student-centered accountability system, which is the multiple measures domain. Multiple measures are calculated for 12th grade students or graduates only. Multiple measures include a graduation score that looks at a 4-year graduation rate and a 5-year graduation rate, and a college and career readiness achievement score that looks at how many graduates completed activities to prepare for college and/or careers. The multiple measures domain is included in the new system to show the importance of earning a high school diploma and to encourage students to be prepared for college or careers after high school. The graduation rate indicator will look at the 2015 cohort for the 4-year graduation rate and the 2014 cohort for the 5-year graduation rate. Again, we will look at the 2015 cohort for your 4-year graduation rate calculation and the 2014 cohort for the 5-year graduation rate calculation. The College and Career Readiness Achievement Indicator will look only at the graduates in the 2015 cohort. Again, only graduates in the 2015 cohort. Graduation points are based on 2 calculations. The first calculation is the 4-year graduation rate, which will use the 2015 cohort. This is the percentage of students who graduate within 4 years. If a school's 4-year graduation rate is 90% or higher, then the rate defaults to 100%, or 100 points. If the school's 4-year graduation rate is below 90%, then the school's 4-year graduation rate is not adjusted. The 4-year graduation rate is included in the new system because graduating in 4 years is the general expectation for students in Indiana. The second calculation is the 5-year graduation rate. This is determined based on the difference between the percentage of students who graduated within 5 years and those who graduated within 4 years for the same cohort. This is where we will look at the 2014 cohort. So we will look at the 2014 cohort's 4-year graduation rate and the 2014 cohort's 5-year graduation rate. When calculating the 5-year graduation rate, we will look at the prior year cohort rather than the cohort used to determine the 4-year graduation rate. The 5-year graduation rate points are included to encourage schools to stick with students who weren't able to graduate within 4 years and ensure that these students get a high school diploma by year 5. The multiple measures domain also looks at how many students work to better prepare for college or a career by completing different activities. The College and Career Readiness Achievement Score identifies the percentage of graduates who either earned a passing score on an advanced placement exam, earned a passing score on an international baccalaureate exam, earned at least 3 transcripted college credit hours from a course approved by the Department of Education, or earned an industry certification approved by the Department of Workforce Development. Please note that each student may only be counted once, regardless of how many indicators that student completes. For example, a student who passes an advanced placement exam and earns dual credit will only count once in this calculation. These activities are used because they are all connected to increased college or career readiness. If 25% or more of graduates from the school achieved at least one of these activities, then the school receives a full 100 points for its College and Career Readiness Achievement Score. If the percentage of graduates achieving at least one of these activities is below 25%, then the school receives points based on the actual percentage that completed a college and career activity multiplied by 4. Let's look at an example starting with the graduation rate score. 88 of 100 students in the current year cohort graduated in 4 years. This means High School XYZ has a 4-year graduation rate of 88%, yielding a score of 88 points. For last year's cohort, High School XYZ's 4-year graduation rate was 92%. For the same cohort, the 5-year graduation rate was 97%. The difference between 97% and 92% shows that an additional 5% of the cohort graduated. This yields a 5-year graduation rate score of 5 points for the school. When added together, High School XYZ has an overall graduation rate score of 93 points. Now let's calculate the College and Career Readiness Achievement Score. 18 of the 88 graduates in the current 4-year cohort earned a College and Career Readiness measure, meaning they either passed an International Baccalaureate exam, passed an Advanced Placement exam, earned dual credit, or earned an industry certification. This gives us an achievement rate of 20.5%. Since the school did not meet the goal of 25% of graduates earning a College and Career Readiness measure, the actual achievement rate is multiplied by 4. This yields a College and Career Readiness Achievement Score of 81.8 points for High School XYZ. When we weight the graduation rate and College and Career Readiness rate scores equally, High School XYZ receives 87.4 points for the overall multiple measures domain. All right, now let's look at how these 3 domains make up the final accountability grade for schools. The new system is based on a 0 to 100 point scale rather than a 0 to 4 point scale. Each of the 3 domains is issued a score based on this 0 to 100 point scale. As you can see, 90 to 100 points equates to an A, 80 to 89.9 points equates to a B, and so on. Please note that scores are always rounded to the first decimal point. The scores for each domain are then weighted to determine the overall score for a school. Grades are no longer calculated based on a school's model or grade configuration. Instead, calculations are based on grades 3 through 8 and grades 9 through 12. The domain weighting for grades 3 through 8 is 50% performance and 50% growth. This means that the performance domain score and the growth domain score are weighted equally when calculating the final score for a school. Please note that there is no multiple measures domain for grades 3 through 8. This is because Indiana currently does not have any multiple measures that apply to these grades. Multiple measures are currently only found at the 12th grade or graduation level. The domain weighting for grades 9 through 12 is 60% multiple measures, or when we break this down, 30% graduation rate and 30% College and Career Readiness Achievement rate, 20% performance, and 20% growth. Again, it is important to note that grades for 15-16 accountability on the 9 through 12 side will not include growth. This is because we currently cannot calculate growth for 10th grade since these students took a different assessment when they were in 8th grade. Therefore, the domain weighting for 9 through 12 for 15-16 accountability will be 60% multiple measures and 40% growth. 40% performance. Again, 60% multiple measures, 40% performance. The overall score for a school is the sum of the weighted domain scores based on the 0 to 100 point scale seen above. The new system acknowledges that there are schools that serve grades that span both 3 through 8 and 9 through 12. For example, a school may serve grades 7 through 12 or grades K through 12. For these schools, the same domain weightings apply based on the grade spans, but these scores are also weighted based on enrollment in order to ensure a more accurate grade for the school. Let's look at how this plays out. For the performance domain, we start by taking the performance score for grades 3 through 8 and multiplying it by the designated weight of 50%. We then multiply this weighted score by the percent of students enrolled in grades 3 through 8 at the school. We complete the same process for the 9 through 12 side. Note that the weighting is different on the 9 through 12 side because performance is only 20% of the grade for 9 through 12. These two scores are then added together to get the overall performance domain score for the school. Again, for 15-16 accountability on the 9 through 12 side, the weighting for performance will be 40% rather than 20%. We apply the same process for the growth domain. Since the weightings are the same for both performance and growth, we won't go into the calculation again here. However, please note for 15-16 accountability, the 9 through 12 component of this equation will not be included. This is again because we will not have a growth domain score for 9 through 12. Lastly, since the multiple measures domain is only on the 9 through 12 side, we only have to take the multiple measures domain score and multiply it by the designated weight of 60%, then multiply the weighted score by the percent of students enrolled in grades 9 through 12. These final scores are then added together to get the overall score for the school. Let's look at an example. School JKL serves grades 7 through 12, which includes grades on both the 3 through 8 and the 9 through 12 sides. There are 30 students in grades 7 and 8 and 70 students in grades 9 through 12, for a total of 100 students in the school. Therefore, the enrollment weight for the 3 through 8 side is 30%, and the enrollment weight for the 9 through 12 side is 70%. These percentages are what we use to weight each domain component by enrollment. Let's do a sample calculation looking at the performance domain. The school earned 86 points for grades 7 and 8 in performance. The school also earned 90 points for grades 9 through 12 in performance. For grades 7 and 8, we take the 86 points earned and multiply by the performance domain weight of 50%, since this is a designated weight for grades 3 through 8. We then incorporate the enrollment weight of 30%. This gives us 12.9 points for grades 7 and 8. Now for grades 9 through 12. The school earned 90 points for grades 9 through 12 in performance. For grades 9 through 12, we take the 90 points earned and multiply by the performance domain weight of 20%, since this is the designated weight for 9 through 12. We then incorporate the enrollment weight of 70%. This gives us 12.6 points for grades 9 through 12. When we add these two weighted scores together, we end up with 25.5 points overall for the performance domain. The same process is then completed for the growth and multiple measures domains. Let's say when we consider the enrollment weighting, we end up with an overall growth domain score of 22.4 points and an overall multiple measures domain score of 35.1 points. To get the final score for the school, we add 25.5 points for performance, 22.4 points for growth, and 35.1 points for multiple measures to get an overall score of 83 points. Under the new system, if a school does not have the data or information to calculate one of the domains, then that domain is simply not included in the school's grade. Please note that a school is not penalized for a missing domain. In order to accommodate, the system adjusts the weightings of the existing domains to replace the missing domain. One reason, and probably the most common reason why, a school may not be able to calculate a domain is because the school does not meet the minimum number of students required to calculate a domain. Specifically, a school must have at least 30 eligible students to calculate performance, 40 eligible students to calculate growth, and 10 students in the graduation cohort to calculate multiple measures. In order to try and resolve the issue of a school not having enough data to calculate a domain, the new system provides for the aggregation of data until the minimum number is met. For example, high school XYZ had 8 students in its graduation cohort to calculate the multiple measures domain in 15-16. Since the school did not meet the minimum requirement of 10 students to calculate multiple measures, we must aggregate and look to the immediately preceding year's data. For high school XYZ, there were 10 students in its graduation cohort in the previous year. When we add the current number of 8 students and the previous number of 10 students, we exceed the minimum number of students required to calculate multiple measures. Therefore, the school's multiple measures domain will be based on the results from the 8 students in the current year and the results from the 10 students in the previous year. Let's look at one more example of aggregation. Elementary school ABC had 23 eligible students to calculate the performance domain in 15-16. Since the school did not meet the minimum requirement of 30 students to calculate performance, we must aggregate and look to the immediately preceding year's data. For elementary school ABC, there were 17 eligible students in the previous year. When we add the current number of 23 students and the previous number of 17 students, we exceed the minimum number of students required to calculate performance. Therefore, the school's performance domain will be based on the results of the 23 students from 15-16 and the results of the 17 students from 14-15. There are a few other considerations we'd like to address. While the new rule no longer considers schools in models or configurations, it does recognize that some schools may need to be addressed differently. There are 4 types of schools that are addressed specifically in the rule. The first is a feeder school. A feeder school is a school with no tested grades, specifically kindergarten, first, or second grade only. Since these schools do not have any test data needed to determine any domain scores, a feeder school's grade is based on the average performance domain scores of all schools where its students matriculated and attended 3rd grade. The second type of school addressed specifically in the rule is an atypical school. An atypical school is that one that cannot receive a grade because it does not have a score for performance, growth, or multiple measures, but does have grades that could provide data for these domains. An atypical school is one that even when we aggregate, we cannot calculate any of the domains. A final grade is determined by the state board based on the department's findings and other available data for the atypical school. The third type of school addressed specifically in the rule is a new school. A new school is a school that has been open for 3 years or less. A new school may choose to have its grade based on all available domain scores or have its grade based solely on the growth domain score. Additionally, Innovation Network schools and Innovation Network charter schools are considered new schools in their first 3 years operating as an Innovation Network school or Innovation Network charter school. The fourth and last type of school is an adult high school. An adult high school is a charter school that has a majority of students that should have already graduated or are 18 years or older when first enrolled at the adult high school. Adult high schools have a separate accountability system entirely that is established by the state board through a different administrative rule. We're going to pause here and see if there are any questions on how to calculate the final grade or the other school models. The department hopes that you found this information helpful and that it provided you with a better understanding of Indiana's new student-centered accountability system for schools. Please feel free to contact the Indiana Department of Education at schoolaccountability@doe.in.gov if you have any additional questions on the material covered in this presentation. We also encourage you to join our school accountability community on Learning Connection, where we post weekly notifications as well as resources for all things accountability. Lastly, we would greatly appreciate receiving feedback on this presentation from all participants. If you have a few minutes after this presentation, please complete the survey, which can be accessed through the below link, to let us know how helpful you found this webinar. This link is also, if you don't get a chance to jot it down real quick here, this link is also available on Learning Connection. We have it posted in one of our notifications about the webinars, so you can link from there as well if you don't have the opportunity to get this, to save this link now. Thank you for your time and for participating in this webinar on the new Student-Centered Accountability System. As a reminder, the next 5 sessions of our webinar series will be on the growth model specifically. Those start this afternoon at 2 p.m. So please, if you have not registered, go ahead and you can still register for any of those growth model presentations that begin today. We hope you have a good rest of the day. Again, thank you so much for participating in today's webinar.